Welcome back to the original Loretta Brown Show with my guest, David L. Lieberman. And I want to remind everybody that these shows are archived. You can listen to this show over and over again anytime you want at the archives for 1150 a.m. KKNW, the original Loretta Brown Show. And we're on iTunes, Podcast One, Megaphone, Twitter, YouTube. I'm sure I left something out. Anyway, we're out there, and please go and listen to all the other shows too, as well as this one. So before the break, David was just, I don't know, I was telling him during the break that this book for me has brought in the beauty of these teachings and the aliveness of them. It's just, I don't know. I just love the way that you're explaining things. I want to bring out a couple of things. Number one, why is the idea of Transcendental Judaism so important?
Well, I believe it's important because it may be a path through which more and more Jews can feel their connection with God. And again, I'm talking Jews now, but I'm not only just talking Jews. We can talk about, this field of the transcendent is available to everyone. But today we're talking sort of through the lens of Judaism. And I'm sure you have other guests who talk about the field of the transcendent through other lenses and other spiritual practice. But Judaism in particular, Judaism teaches, and you may know this, Loretta, that the Hebrew Bible is particularly the first portion of it, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Those are referred to in Judaism as Torah, and you used the word Torah before. Yes. And spread out through those books are commandments. Now, almost all of us have heard of the 10 Commandments, but it may surprise non-Jews to learn that there are hundreds of other commandments in the Torah. And Judaism teaches that we connect with God by performing the commandments. And in Hebrew, the word for a commandment is a mitzvah, and the plural of mitzvah is mitzvot. And so, the word mitzvah in Hebrew comes from the Aramaic word tzavta. And I don't want to get too much into wording here, but the Aramaic word tzavta means connection. So it's all about connection. It's all about God. And by performing the mitzvot, Jewish teachings are that we connect with God. Now, the reason that, again, that I think my book is important is that the traditional practice of the mitzvot for many Jews is not necessarily so meaningful. There are practices about the way we eat, eating in a kosher manner, keeping the Sabbath, which means not going out and working on Saturday, and there are other things, and many modern Jews don't connect with that so much. Many do, and it's very meaningful to them, and they do find connection with God. But many Jews feel a sense of spiritual. Here's the thing, of course, you've heard this before, spiritual, not religious, right?
Yeah,
many
right.
have a sense of spirituality, but they don't feel religious. And historically, also, Judaism teaches that when we understand and perform the mitzvot, we can do so at multiple levels. And the level that we don't often talk about, the first level is called the level of plain meaning. In Hebrew, we say pshat. And then we can interpret and understand a mitzvah at a higher level, more of a meaning that is called remez, which is the meaning of sensing or feeling. Then the third level is drash, which is more an intellectual level. And the fourth level is the mystical level called sod. And so my premise here is that many of us traditionally understand the mitzvot at the lower levels, and we can also connect through the mitzvot at the mystical level. And so to me, that's what's important, is bringing back the practice of connecting, performing the mitzvot, the connection at the spiritual, the mystical level, for those who may not feel the connection at the other levels. And when I say bring back, Judaism has a rich history of meditation.
Yeah.
So that's why I believe that it was important for me to talk about Transcendental Judaism, to reestablish, to revive, maybe in a way, that we connect through the mitzvot, but we now, not to forget that we can connect maybe directly at the spiritual level, the mystical level, and people who maybe haven't connected at the other levels may find an opportunity to do so through the revival of these teachings.
At revival of these teachings. So this kind of brings people together, right? Of different, a variety of ways of looking at that. And I was also thinking to myself, there are many, many times when people do things, and I say it with all respect, mindlessly, right? So I'm doing this thing, and I'm thinking about how am I going to pay my taxes, and why are the kids fighting, and blah blah. But you're bringing in this. It literally is a richness, a deepness, right? A fulfilled aspect to it. Yeah.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yes.
Many of the commandments in Judaism, many of the practices in Judaism require us or suggest to us that we say a blessing before we perform an action. So before we sit down to eat, we say a blessing. If we see there's a blessing for seeing a rainbow. Okay. There are many blessings out there, and that provides us a kind of a mindfulness that we don't take the world around us for granted. And so that can be very helpful to us, and the various commandments, just by performing them, right? If we want to eat in a kosher way, we have to plan, right, that we're not going to eat milk and meat together in the same meal, right? So there's a mindfulness around that. Now, when I talk about meditation, I am not talking about mindfulness. A lot of people conflate the word meditation with mindfulness. Now, there is a type of meditation called mindfulness, which many people practice, and many benefits have been shown to come out of it, right? You sort of sit quietly, maybe you focus on the breath for a while, and then you are mindful of thoughts and feelings that come up. Perhaps you notice that something triggers you and you say, I've learned something about myself, or right? And it's a practice that has a number of benefits. But the type of meditation that I'm talking about is not a mindfulness meditation. It's a meditation that facilitates, in a way, I'm sort of making this word up, mindlessness. It's the quieting of the mind, not mindful. But as I described in my first experience, I didn't have thoughts. I didn't have feelings. There was that, I experienced that ayin, that no thingness. And that is a point that I wanted to clarify. Now, there's even another type of meditation. I'm not going to go through all the millions of types of meditations there are, but there's a third type, three primarily popular types of meditation. One, and the last one I want to talk about is a meditation of focus or concentration, right? Sometimes people want to meditate because they want to enliven a certain quality, maybe more in their lives, like gratefulness or compassion, or right. They want to feel that they want to strengthen something in their lives. So they'll sit quietly, they'll contemplate, and you can use the word meditate. They meditate on that, and it makes that become more lively in their lives. So there's different types of meditation. Each one has its own types of benefits. And I just want to make it clear that the type of meditation that I'm referring to is one that facilitates transcendence, because that's what takes us down to our essence, lets us quiet the mind down to essentially nothingness. And then as we experience that, we sort of absorb that into our lives.
Thank you. It was actually, you went exactly in the right direction. I want to point out to people that in your book, Transcendental Judaism, you do discuss several types of meditation in there. And I think it's important for that clarification. So mindlessness, no thingness, like, oh my goodness, there's nothing going on with the committee. They're done.
They hit the gavel and it's been adjourned. Quiet.
Yeah.
Quiet for a while.
Yeah, for a while. Yeah. You mentioned that you were reviving something, and I know that you have really studied ancient Jewish texts to pull some of this forward. Do you want to comment on that?
Just briefly, yes, and I'm actually pulling the book up here. I discuss about 10 ancient types of Jewish meditation in my book, and the thread that connects, there are different types of meditation, but the thread that connects them is this concept of nullifying your ego, stopping your thinking, isolating yourself, unifying your mind with God, right? And you're not doing that if you're chattering away, or thinking. And those meditations are, unfortunately, the literature talks about that some of them are very difficult to do, and are only supposed to be done by maybe people of a certain age after they've gained a certain amount of maturity and things like that. There's a type of meditation called permutations, which, just very briefly, you take the name of God in Hebrew, or one of the names of God in Hebrew, 4 letters, Yud He Vav He. I'm not going to get into all the details about that, but then there's Hebrew vowels, and then you intersperse the consonants, the 4 letters of God, with the Hebrew vowels, and you do a permutation of interspersing them. Why is that? Because one of the ancient spiritual texts said that, traditional Judaism, God spoke, right, and the world came into being. So if we can align ourselves with the words, all the different permutations and combinations of the letters, then we may be able to become part of God's mind, who's into practice, right? And so it's all about unifying through different ways, unifying your mind with God's mind. And that's why I talk about reviving them, because there's this practice of nullification of the ego. And in Hebrew, we say bitul, the unification of God, yehudim, isolating yourself so that your thoughts calm down and you isolate yourself from everything else. Hit bodedut. These are just different ways of getting at this place of silence, where that a 20th century rabbi who's fairly well known, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, he may be known by people because he marched with Martin Luther King in Selma. And when he was marching, he famously said, "I am praying with my feet."
Yes.
Heschel talked about this silence. He talked about it as a universal stillness, he said. when we want to get close to God, we want to go beyond our thoughts and our emotions to a universal stillness.
Yeah.
That's how he described it. Mm-hmm.
I love that. You're making me feel still. I like it. Maybe we could just spread that out through the world, right? Which actually is a great question. So can one person touching the transcendent affect others and the world?
Yes, it can happen. Our Hebrew texts talk a little bit about that. Some of us may remember the story in Genesis of Abraham negotiating with God over the fate of Sodom.
Yeah.
God said, "Okay, if there are 50 righteous people in Sodom." Now, I'm making a tie here between a righteous person and someone who has this transcendent experience and then is aligned with God, so to speak. So I'm sort of making that little connection there. And God says, "Yeah, okay, if there are 50 righteous people, I won't destroy Sodom." Okay. And then Abraham says, "Well, what if there's 45?" Do you remember this story?
I do very much.
Finally, they negotiate and it's 10, right? Now, apparently, there were not even 10 righteous people because Sodom did get destroyed, right? But the idea is that not everybody has got to have this connection, right? A smaller group of people can affect the outcome of the lives of a larger group. And there have been scientific studies that have shown not only are there individual positive effects of repeated experiences of transcendence, but when groups get together of a certain critical size, then they have a positive effect of the world around them. And so we pick the concept up from the Hebrew Bible and we move it forward into the scientific age a little bit.
Yeah, because we do a lot of talking about the quantum field and quantum entanglement and things like that, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
How two particles may be separated by vast differences, and when one changes its spin, the other one automatically does so immediately, even when those particles are separated at a distance where farther away than the speed of light, could have connected them happening. And we think that there's nothing faster than the speed of light. So what's happening, I don't know. I don't think we know.
I don't know.
But that connectedness is there.
Yeah, I know, I practice Reiki and we do distance healing. And of course, I just kind of feel like at that level, we transcend time and space and distance. And there's that oneness, there's that unity. Yeah.
Yes.
I have so many questions. I'm trying to figure, I have two burning questions and I'm watching our time. You talked about the Kabbalah earlier, and I know that it is depicted as a tree. I loved your talk about the sap and the tree. Why are the 10 Sephirot, why are they depicted as a tree?
They're depicted as a tree, and they're depicted as a person. Okay, and they're depicted as actually an upside down tree.
Okay.
I have that in the book. I don't remember what I'm going to reach for my book, but it doesn't matter what page it is. But anyway, and the reason is because if they're depicted when they're depicted as an upside down tree, the Sephirot, when they are, yes, thank you.
It's page 20.
Thank you.
Okay.
When they're depicted that way, then the roots of the tree are viewed as being fed by the Ein Sof.
Yes.
And so then that life essence, then is that sap is flowing through the roots into the tree, which then manifests itself at the lower levels, in terms of branches and leaves and things like that.
Yeah. There's so much we could say about that. I'm going to jump from tree to tree. You also discuss in your book about the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, and we know there's trees.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Thank you for that. And this will help anyone who's reading the book. I do give two different tree analogies.
Yes.
I try to be clear about them, but the reason that I talk about the tree analogy in the Garden of Eden, is because people say, well, the problem was that Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. Well, that's not the whole name of the tree. The name of the tree is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? What does that mean? To me, that means it's the tree of the knowledge of differences.
Yeah.
Before Adam and Eve ate of that tree, they had a sense of oneness about everything, right? They didn't really comprehend differences, right? They did not know they were naked, for example. Okay. Everything, it was heaven. Eden is all we often refer to as heaven on earth, right? And so this eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the inevitable march in the creation of the world from no thingness to thingness, from oneness to differences. And when Adam and Eve ate of the tree of differences, then all of a sudden their focus then went more outward, right? And well, and they had to, in a way, it had to in a way, right? Because again, they're going to trip over the curb, they're going to trip over the tree branch, if they don't look out for differences in the world. It's a symbol for moving from oneness to manifestation of differences. It's a symbol of the creation of the world, moving from heaven to earth, from oneness to differences. And so Christians view this as an original sin. Jews just view it as a fall. I view it as the inevitable reason that is needed to move us from, to make creation real, to go from nothingness to thingness, putting our attention on the differences. And there's a rabbi named, I'm just checking his name here, Rabbi Aaron of Staroshele, a city, in Europe. He says, God, we need to see from both sides of the coin. God sees God's self, and we see objects, people, and things. But really, they're both different sides of the same coin. And
right.
So Adam and Eve had to start to see objects, people, and things just in order to make the world work.
Yeah. So we are actually, I have to interrupt because we're actually out of time, which is crazy. My guest today, David L. Lieberman, Transcendental Judaism. You can find him at transcendentaljudaism.com and valleybeitmidrash.org. And you have 5 seconds. One last thing to the audience, David.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Loretta, the audience, for listening and for considering another way to look at the world around us.